My name is Emily Vance, and I'm 32 years old. The moment I walked into the Christmas party, my brother Ryan crossed the room, slapped me across the face, and shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. How dare you show your face here? You weren't invited. I barely had time to steady myself before my father Thomas looked up from his glass and sneered. Your place is in the kitchen, not with this family. Every conversation stopped. Dozens of guests turned and stared at me as though I were the scandal instead of the woman being humiliated in front of them. Ryan reached for my arm, clearly intending to drag me back through the doors, but I didn't move. I hadn't driven 3 hours to beg for a seat at their table. I had come because of the sealed envelope hidden inside my coat, and because, by midnight, everything they had built on lies could collapse. Then a chair scraped behind me. A tall man near the fireplace rose so quickly that several guests stepped aside. Back away from her, he thundered. Do you realize this whose face you just struck? My family turned pale. They had recognized the governor, William Hayes, but they had no idea why he knew me, why he looked furious, or why 2 state investigators were standing silently near the ballroom entrance. Ryan's grip loosened. My father's glass trembled. I touched my burning cheek, looked directly at both of them, and realized they still believed I had come alone. They were wrong. Before I tell you what the governor said next, and what happened after I finally walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now? Where are you watching from? And what is the weather like there? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. For 3 seconds, no one moved. Then Ryan released my arm as if my skin had burned him. Governor Hayes, my father said, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. That was how the room finally learned the name of the man who had stood up for me. William Hayes, the governor, whose office controlled the future of the largest public contract my family's company had ever pursued. My father, Thomas Vance, had spent the entire year courting donors, hosting private dinners, and telling anyone who would listen that Vance Construction was about to win the Northridge Renewal Project. My brother Ryan had already ordered champagne, engraved with the contract number. The Christmas party was not really a family celebration. It was a victory party for money they had not yet received. There must be some misunderstanding, Thomas continued. My daughter has a habit of creating scenes. William's expression hardened. The only scene I witnessed was your son striking a guest in front of 40 people. Ryan glanced around, suddenly aware that every phone in the room could become a witness. She trespassed, he said. She has been cut off from this family for years. Cut off? I repeated, or silenced. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. The envelope inside my coat pressed against my ribs like a second heartbeat. William stepped beside me, not in front of me, and that mattered. He was not there to rescue a helpless woman. He was there because I had spent 14 months doing what my family had always mocked me for doing, following documents until lies ran out of places to hide. Miss Vance is not here as your dependent, William said. She is here as the investigative journalist whose reporting led my office to suspend the Northridge Award this morning. The room changed. It was not dramatic in the way movies show. No one screamed. Instead, smiles vanished one by one. A contractor near the bar set down his drink. A banker who had been laughing with Ryan suddenly looked toward the exit. My father's face lost color so quickly that I almost pitied him. Almost. Ryan stared at me. You. It was the first honest word he had spoken all evening. He had spent years calling my work a hobby, forwarding my articles to relatives with laughing emojis, and telling people I survived on unpaid blog posts. He did not know that my recent investigation had been published under a protected byline while the legal review was underway. He did not know that I had interviewed former employees of Vance's Construction, traced payments through 3 shell companies, and found invoices for materials that had never reached construction sites. Most importantly, he did not know who had sent me the first ledger. Across the room, a woman in a silver dress met my eyes. Jessica Moore had been my closest friend since college, and for the last 6 years, the compliance director at my father's company. She had entered the party quietly 10 minutes before me. Until that moment, Ryan had assumed she was there to celebrate him. "This is absurd," Thomas said. He turned toward William, lowering his voice, as if authority could be negotiated privately. "Governor, you know how ambitious reporters work. They take ordinary accounting errors and turn them into accusations. Emily has always resented this family. Resentment does not create bank transfers," I said. "It does not forge inspection signatures. It does not build a state case for steel that was never purchased." The words landed harder than shouting would have. Ryan took a step toward me. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Then why did you delete the December audit folder at 2:14 this afternoon?" His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Jessica had watched the deletion happen through the company's mirrored compliance server. She had also preserved the original folder, the access logs, and the message in which Ryan instructed an employee to clean the Christmas list before the governor arrives. He had meant the list of false vendors. The phrase had become the title of my final evidence package. Thomas's eyes flicked toward Jessica for less than a second, but that second told me he understood. He knew someone inside the company had opened the door for me. "Emily," he said, changing tactics, softening his voice into the tone he used whenever he wanted obedience to sound like concern. "Give me the envelope. We can discuss this privately as a family." I remembered hearing that same voice when I was 23, and he demanded that I decline a journalism fellowship because it embarrassed him to have a daughter chasing scandals. I remembered surrendering then. I did not surrender now. "This stopped being private when you used public money." Thomas moved faster than I expected, reaching for my coat. Before his hand touched me, William stepped between us. "Do not make another mistake in front of witnesses." Behind him, the two investigators at the entrance opened their coats just enough to display their credentials. My father froze. Ryan looked at the doors, calculating whether he could leave without appearing guilty. Then Jessica raised her phone. "You should stay. The governor has only suspended the contract. Emily is about to explain why your company may not survive the night." I took the envelope from my coat, but did not open it. Not yet. For years, Thomas and Ryan had controlled every family conversation by deciding which facts were allowed to exist. If I mentioned the fellowship they had pressured me to reject, I was ungrateful. If I mentioned the job interview Ryan sabotaged by calling the editor and describing me as unstable, I was dramatic. If I asked why my late mother's inheritance had disappeared from the trust account, I was greedy. Their power had never come from being right. It came from speaking first, speaking loudly, and forcing everyone else to defend themselves. That night, I refused their script. "You told everyone I came because I wanted money," I said. "So let's begin with money." I placed the envelope on the piano, opened my laptop, and connected it to the ballroom screen Ryan had planned to use for his contract announcement. The Vance Construction logo vanished. In its place appeared a single scanned document dated 8 years earlier. It was my mother's trust amendment. The room was quiet enough that I heard the projector fan. "Mom left me 20% of the company," I said. "Not because she expected me to work for you, but because she wanted me to remain independent of you." Thomas's face became rigid. Ryan laughed too quickly. "That document was replaced. That is what you told me." A murmur moved through the guests. Ryan stopped smiling. My father's eyes did not leave the screen. "This has nothing to do with the state contract," he said. "It establishes a pattern," William replied. His voice was quieter now, which made the warning sharper. False documents, concealed ownership, financial benefit. Thomas looked at him with open disbelief. You are taking her side based on family paperwork? No, William said. The state is responding to evidence submitted through lawful channels. I am standing beside her because you are trying to intimidate the person who preserved that evidence. I clicked again. The screen changed to 3 columns labeled past, present, and payment. It was the structure I had used to keep myself sane during the investigation. Under past were the moments my family had dismissed as personal failures. The fellowship I lost, the newspaper job that disappeared after a mysterious phone call, the apartment deposit Thomas promised and then withdrew when I refused to return home. Under present were company records, altered inspections, duplicate invoices, false vendors, and private emails. Under payment were the names of shell companies receiving public funds. 2 were controlled by Ryan's college roommate. 1 was registered to Thomas's private accountant. The last had been created using my name. That was the part I had not told William when we first met. My family had not merely mocked my career. They had used my identity as a shield. Vance Media Consulting, I said, reading the shell company's name aloud. It received $940,000 over 18 months. The tax identification number traces back to an application filed with a scan of my passport. Ryan's confidence cracked. You gave us copies of your documents years ago. For the trust, I said. Not for fraud. Watch your language, Thomas snapped. The old command struck the room, automatic and familiar. For a moment, my body remembered being 23. Seated at his dining table, while he tore my fellowship letter in half, and told me that respectable daughters did not investigate powerful men. I had spent years wondering whether I had imagined the cruelty in that sentence. Then I had found the email he sent Ryan the same night. Keep her close or keep her broke. The memory no longer made me small. It made the next click easy. His email filled the screen. No one needed me to interpret it. Thomas stared at the words as though they had betrayed him by surviving. Ryan turned on him. You said those servers were wiped. There it was. The first fracture between them. My father's had snapped toward him, and every guest understood that Ryan had just confirmed knowledge of the destruction. I meant old family files, Thomas said. But the correction arrived too late. Jessica stepped forward. The servers were never wiped. The company kept mirrored backups to satisfy lender requirements. I preserved them after I discovered that compliance reports were being altered. Ryan's gaze shifted to her with naked fury. You did this? I stopped it. Jessica did not retreat. He called her disloyal. Thomas called her confused. Both men spoke over each other, trying to rebuild control from noise. I watched them and understood something that had taken me years to learn. People who demand loyalty often mean silence, and people who call truth betrayal are usually protecting the benefit they gained from the lie. I raised one hand, and William asked the room to remain quiet. Jessica did not contact me first, I said. She contacted an attorney. The attorney contacted the inspector general. I became involved because the shell company carried my name, and because I could document how the scheme began. Thomas's expression changed from anger to calculation. Then this can still be contained. We correct the filings, return disputed funds, and settle the trust issue. Emily gets her shares. Everyone walks away. It was an extraordinary offer, only if one ignored what it revealed. He had denied everything until denial became expensive. I looked at the man who had taught me to confuse fear with respect and asked the first question that truly mattered. Would you be offering me justice if the governor were not standing here? Thomas did not answer. His silence was the answer. I lifted the envelope from the piano. This is not a settlement proposal. It is the publication, notice your attorneys received, this afternoon. My investigation goes live at midnight. Midnight was 47 minutes away. Ryan looked at the clock above the fireplace, then at my laptop. I saw the moment he stopped thinking like a brother and started thinking like an executive trapped inside a collapsing deal. Turn it off, he ordered the technician near the screen. The technician reached for the cable, but one of the investigators shook his head. Do not interfere with potential evidence. Ryan's hand curled into a fist. He had struck me when he believed the room belonged to him. Now that the room had witnesses, he needed a different weapon. You all know what this is, he announced to the guests. Emily has hated us since she failed to make it on her own. She attached herself to the governor, fed him a dramatic story, and now she expects applause. Several people glanced at William. It was a calculated accusation. If Ryan could make my evidence look like personal access, he could turn corruption into gossip. William did not defend his reputation first. He defended the process. Miss Vance and I met once in the presence of counsel after the Inspector General verified the initial records, he said. I did not direct her reporting. I did not provide her documents. I was scheduled to attend tonight, before I knew she would be here, because your father invited me to celebrate a contract that had already been suspended. That last sentence drew uncomfortable looks from the donors. Thomas had used the governor's attendance as proof that the award was guaranteed. Some guests had invested on that promise. When I asked whether Miss Vance would be safe entering this property, William continued, I was assured this was a family gathering. Your behavior has answered that question. Ryan's face tightened. So that speech, whose face you just struck, what was that supposed to mean? Is she some protected celebrity now? William looked at him without blinking. It means you struck the journalist who uncovered an attempt to divert millions from schools, roads, and emergency housing. It means you attacked a cooperating witness in front of state investigators. And it means the person you dismissed as a failure performed the due diligence your own board refused to perform. No one applauded. This was not that kind of triumph. The truth did something more satisfying. It rearranged the room. People who had crowded around Ryan earlier stepped away. The banker near the bar opened his phone and began typing. Two subcontractors whispered urgently beside the windows. A board member named Robert Hayes removed the Vance construction pin from his lapel and placed it in his pocket. Thomas noticed every movement. Nobody leaves, he said. His voice cracked on the final word. William turned toward him. You do not control the exits. Thomas recovered quickly. He approached me with his palms open. The picture of a reasonable father. Emily, listen to me. Whatever happened with the trust was wrong. I can admit that. But if this article is published, hundreds of employees could lose their jobs. Families will suffer. Is that what you want on Christmas? The burden he had prepared for me. His decisions, my guilt. For years, he had turned consequences into proof of my cruelty. I looked at the guests who worked for his company, then at Jessica. She gave a small nod. We had anticipated this. The article does not demand that the company close, I said. It identifies the people who authorized the scheme and the board members who ignored warnings. The Inspector General has recommended an independent administrator so legitimate projects and payroll can continue. Robert Hayes stepped forward. The board was not informed of an administrator. The board was informed at 4 this afternoon, Jessica said. The notice went to the official account. Ryan redirected board mail to his private server at 4:12. Robert checked his phone. The shame on his face shifted into anger. You told us the system was down. Then you should welcome an independent forensic review. Ryan pointed at Jessica. She is manipulating records. But he had no answer that did not expose him. Thomas tried again, this time dropping the caring tone. You publish that story, and I will make sure every editor in this country knows you exploited confidential family information. I will sue you until you cannot afford a room to sleep in." The threat might once have worked. I had spent my first year as a reporter counting coins at grocery stores and pretending hunger was discipline. He had used money to make every act of independence feel temporary. But my article had already survived review by 3 attorneys, 2 forensic accountants, and an editor who knew exactly whom we were confronting. "Your lawyers sent that threat 6 weeks ago," I said. "They withdrew it after we provided the first evidence index." His eyes narrowed. He had not known. Ryan had concealed that failure from him, just as Thomas had concealed the server backups from Ryan. Their alliance was beginning to consume itself. Then Jessica's phone chimed. She read the message, looked at William, and said, "The emergency board meeting has reached quorum." Ryan laughed, but the sound was thin. "At 11:15 on Christmas Eve, your bylaws allow an emergency vote when officers expose the company to criminal liability," she replied. The ballroom screen split. My evidence remained on one side. On the other appeared 6 board members in a secure video conference. Robert joined them from the room. Thomas stared at the faces, as if they were trespassers inside his home. The board chair spoke first. "Pending the forensic investigation, Thomas Vance is suspended as chief executive, and Ryan Vance is suspended as chief operating officer, effective immediately." Ryan lunged toward the laptop. An investigator intercepted him, not violently, simply placing himself in the way. "Do not touch it," the board chair continued. Company accounts requiring either man's authorization were frozen. Building access was revoked. Corporate counsel had been instructed to preserve all records and cooperate with authorities. Thomas looked at me, and for the first time that night, he did not look angry. He looked afraid. "What have you done?" he whispered. "I documented what you did," I answered. The board made its own decision. The front doors opened behind us. 4 additional investigators entered, carrying sealed orders. The family party had become the scene my father had spent 14 months trying to prevent. The lead investigator introduced herself as Special Agent Marisol Vega and handed Thomas 2 documents: a preservation order covering the resort, company offices, vehicles, and cloud accounts, and a warrant authorizing the seizure of devices connected to the false vendor network. My father read the first page, then looked toward William as though the governor could erase it with a gesture. "You arranged this spectacle," he said. William's reply was immediate. "A judge signed those orders after reviewing sworn evidence. I learned they had been approved 30 minutes ago." That distinction mattered. William had influence, but he was not the source of the case. My family could not dismiss the investigation as political theater without dismissing bank records, access logs, forged documents, and their own messages. Agent Vega asked everyone to place company phones on a table. Jessica complied first. Robert followed. Ryan kept one hand inside his jacket. I watched his eyes move toward the side corridor leading to the service stairs. "Don't." He looked at me with the same hatred he had worn when I entered. But now fear lived beneath it. "You think you won?" he asked. "You destroyed our name." "No," I said. "I stopped you from hiding behind it." Agent Vega instructed him to remove his hand. He slowly produced a phone that was not listed on the company inventory. Jessica recognized it. "That's the vendor phone." Ryan turned on her. "You should have been grateful. I protected your department every time Dad wanted to fire you." Thomas's head snapped toward him. "Be quiet." "Why?" Ryan shouted. "You said the payments were temporary. You said Northridge would cover everything before the auditors noticed." The words struck the ballroom harder than any accusation I had made. Thomas crossed the space between them and hissed, "You signed the transfers." "Because you told me to," Ryan replied. Their carefully maintained hierarchy dissolved in less than a minute. Each man began offering pieces of the other to save himself. Thomas claimed Ryan had invented the vendors. Ryan claimed Thomas controlled the accountant. Thomas accused him of stealing beyond the agreed amount. Ryan revealed that the false invoices had begun years before North Ridge. Guests moved farther away, not from danger, but from association. Agent Vega let them speak. A second investigator recorded every word. I stood near the piano and felt no joy, only a fierce stillness. I had imagined this moment during sleepless nights, but imagination had made revenge feel loud and bright. Reality was colder. Their punishment was not my anger. It was the loss of the story they had told about themselves. Respectable men, disciplined leaders, victims of an ungrateful daughter. Then Thomas saw the last item on the piano, a cream envelope, worn soft at the edges. It was not the publication notice. That notice lay open beside my laptop. The cream envelope was the letter my mother had written to me before she died, the one Jessica found inside an archived legal file. Thomas went pale. "Where did you get that?" "It was stored with the original trust amendment," I said. "You kept it from me." He reached for it, but I picked it up first. My name was written across the front in my mother's hand. For 8 years, Thomas had told me she regretted leaving me company shares and had changed her mind at the end. The letter proved the opposite. I unfolded it and read only the passage that belonged in that room. "Emily sees what others train themselves not to see. Do not punish her for telling the truth. One day that courage may be the only thing standing between this family and ruin." The silence afterward felt different from every silence before it. This one did not belong to Thomas. He could not command it away. I looked at him and asked, "Did you hate my career because you thought I would fail, or because you were afraid I would eventually look at you?" His lips parted, but no difference came. Ryan stared at the carpet. I suddenly understood the shape of my childhood. The kitchen comments, the lectures about obedience, the financial threats, the sabotaged opportunities. None of them had been random acts of cruelty. Thomas had spent years training me to doubt my own judgment, because a daughter who trusted her eyes was dangerous to a man surviving on concealment. Your mother was emotional near the end. I folded the letter and placed it back inside the envelope. She was accurate. Agent Vega examined the unregistered phone and asked Ryan for the passcode. He refused. She informed him that the device would be secured for forensic extraction. At that moment, it began ringing. The name on the SIS screen was Victor Lane, Thomas's private accountant. Ryan reached for it instinctively. Agent Vega stopped him and read the preview message aloud. "Transfer failed. Account frozen." "What did you tell them?" Thomas closed his eyes. The remaining guests no longer needed my article to know the truth. But in 21 minutes, the rest of the state would know it too. With 12 minutes left before midnight, Thomas asked to speak to me alone. Agent Vega refused to let him leave the ballroom, so he lowered his voice and stood beside the darkened Christmas tree, as though privacy could be created by posture. "I can still repair this," he said. "I will restore your shares, transfer the lake house to you, and issue a statement praising your work. Delay the article for 24 hours. He was offering to be the symbols he believed I had always wanted: property, approval, public acceptance. 8 years earlier, I might have mistaken the offer for love. Now I heard the condition beneath every word. "And Jessica?" I asked. His gaze shifted. "She resigns quietly. The employees who warned you. We handle them internally. The stolen public funds? Money can be returned." I looked at him and realized he still believed consequences were a price to negotiate after being caught. "You are not asking for time to tell the truth. You are asking for time to choose another lie." I stepped away. Ryan was seated near the piano while an investigator copied the contents of his phone. He looked smaller without the crowd orbiting him. Then the ballroom screen changed again. Jessica had opened a recovered group chat titled Christmas Cleanup. The messages were dated that morning. Thomas had written, "If Emily appears, remove her before Hayes sees her." Ryan had replied, "I'll make her lose control in front of everyone." Another message instructed resort security to disable the camera facing the main entrance. They had expected me. "You said I wasn't invited," I told Ryan. "You knew I was coming." Jessica displayed the formal invitation she had sent on behalf of the compliance committee, along with the delivery proving Thomas's assistant opened it. My brother had not slapped an unexpected intruder. He had tried to provoke a witness before she could speak to the governor. Agent Vega read the messages twice, then informed Ryan that striking me could now be examined as possible witness intimidation. His face emptied. "Dad told me she was blackmailing us," he said. Thomas answered without looking at him. "You chose what you did." The betrayal in Ryan's almost made me laugh, but it was too familiar. My father had used him differently than he used me. He rewarded Ryan's obedience until Ryan confused privilege with love. Now that obedience had become evidence, Thomas abandoned him. "He will sacrifice you before he accepts responsibility," I said. "He already has." Ryan looked at me, perhaps expecting sympathy, perhaps asking for rescue without lowering himself enough to say it. I gave him neither. Understanding why someone becomes cruel does not require volunteering to absorb the consequences of that cruelty. At 11:59, my editor called. I answered on speaker. "Legal is clear," she said. "The evidence links are live. We publish on your signal." Thomas whispered my name. For the first time in my life, it sounded like a plea. William stood near the fireplace, silent now because the choice belonged to me. Jessica held my mother's letter against her chest. The board members remained on screen. Around us, guests watched the clock change. I thought about every time I had apologized for noticing what others wanted hidden. Then I said, "Publish." At midnight, phones across the ballroom vibrated almost at once. The headline appeared on the screen. Christmas list. How a family contractor built a public empire on ghost vendors, forged records, and a stolen identity. Beneath, it was my name. Not the protected byline, not an alias, Emily Vance. Ryan read the first paragraph and covered his face. Thomas kept staring at the headline as messages flooded his phone. A lender suspending credit, a donor canceling support, a partner demanding repayment, a news station requesting comment. The company's public contract portal changed from pending review to disqualified. William finally spoke. "The Northridge Award is permanently withdrawn. Vance Construction will be barred from new state bids while the investigation proceeds." Thomas's knees seemed to weaken, but no one moved to steady him. For years, the room had rushed to protect his dignity. That night, dignity was no longer the emergency. Truth was. I closed my laptop and put my mother's letter inside my coat. Thomas called after me as I crossed the ballroom. "You walk out now, and you are no longer my daughter." The threat had controlled me for years because I believed belonging was something he could grant or remove. I turned at the door. "You stopped treating me like your daughter long before tonight. The difference is that I finally stopped calling your control love." Ryan stood with one cheek wet with tears he seemed ashamed to show. "Emily, wait. Tell them I didn't plan the whole thing." "Then tell them the truth," I said. "All of it. Not to save yourself from Dad, not to win me back. Tell it, because the people you stole from deserve it." I did not offer forgiveness. Forgiveness given under pressure is only another form of obedience. Jessica joined me while William remained behind to answer questions about the suspended contract. As the doors closed, sound I heard was Agent Vega asking Thomas to sit down and stop touching his phone. I had imagined leaving with a victorious speech. but I needed none. The article was speaking in every newsroom, boardroom, and government office that had once welcomed my father without question. Over the following weeks, the consequences became measurable. Federal and state prosecutors charged Thomas with procurement fraud, conspiracy, identity theft, and obstruction. Ryan accepted a plea agreement, surrendered hidden accounts, and testified against him. He lost his executive license, his home, and the circle of friends who had mistaken access for affection. Thomas refused every deal, insisting that the family name would protect him. It did not. He was convicted after a public trial and sentenced to 11 years. The court restored my stolen shares and ordered repayment of the trust distributions. Vance construction avoided collapse only because the board removed both men, cooperated with investigators, and placed legitimate operations under independent management. Jessica became chief compliance officer. Hundreds of employees kept their jobs while the shell companies were dissolved, and recovered funds returned to public programs. I sold half my restored shares to an employee ownership trust and used part of the settlement to establish a legal fund for whistleblowers threatened by powerful employers. I kept one thing for myself: my mother's letter. A year later, on Christmas Eve, I read it again in my own apartment before submitting a new investigation. There was no grand family reunion. Ryan sent several apologies. I answered only after his actions began matching his words. Thomas wrote from prison and still described himself as the victim. I returned every letter unopened. Some people believed revenge meant I should have felt pleasure watching them lose everything. What I felt was quieter and more lasting. They had built their power by deciding who was credible, who belonged, and whose pain could be ignored. I took that power away by creating a record they could not erase. So, when people ask whether I regret walking into a party where I wasn't invited, my answer is simple. I was invited by the truth they had buried, and I stayed long enough to make sure it was heard. Family can survive disagreement, distance, and disappointment. But can it survive without accountability? And when the people who demand your loyalty are using it to hide what they have done, is walking away betrayal? Or is it the first honest choice you have ever made? We appreciate you staying until the end of this emotional story. Everything in and made only for educational and entertainment value. We hope it reminds you that you don't have to keep making space for people who only bring confusion into your life. A calm heart is worth protecting, and if it means letting go of familiar names, that is a price worth paying.